don't want to move very fast. You want to try to keep something between you and your target, so you're not in the open, you know.
The Montana wilderness has always held secrets, wild, untamed, and silent. But today, the silence surrounding one man's cabin has shaken even the toughest mountain locales. Just 1 minute ago, authorities revealed what they found inside Tom Oar's secluded log home, and the details are beyond chilling. For years, Tom, the star of mountain men, represented everything pure about the American frontier: hard work, self-reliance, and peace away from the modern world. Yet, when no one heard from him for weeks, concern quickly turned into fear. Neighbors who'd long admired the smoke rising from his chimney suddenly saw nothing but still air. The cold mountain wind blew through the valley, but no sign of life came from Tom's cabin. That's when rangers decided to check on him. What they discovered after forcing open that old wooden door would stun even the most seasoned survivalist. Before we reveal what was found, take a moment to subscribe and hit the notification bell, because what you're about to hear might just change the way you see mountain men forever. When rangers arrived at Tom Oar's property, the snow was knee-deep and the wind howled through the Yaak Valley like a warning. His truck sat buried beneath a thin crust of ice, and his dogs were nowhere to be seen. The front door, usually latched tight with a hand-carved wooden bar, hung slightly open, something no mountain man would ever allow. As the first ranger stepped inside, his breath caught. The cabin was dark, silent, and freezing, the hearth stone cold as if it hadn't burned in weeks. Dust hung in the air like smoke, and a strange metallic scent lingered, half rust, half wilderness. Every detail of Tom's life remained untouched. A deer hide still stretched on the frame, his handmade knife gleaming on the table, an old mug resting beside it with a film of frozen coffee inside. It looked as if he'd simply stepped outside and never returned. On the far wall, a calendar was frozen in time, its last date circled in red, October 3rd. Beside it, pinned under a knife, was a scrap of leather with the words, "Keep the fire alive." None of the officers could explain the eerie stillness or why a faint humming could be heard beneath the floorboards, like a wind trapped underground. They searched every corner: his trapping gear, the attic crawl space, the supply shed. But there was no sign of a struggle, and no footprints leading away from the cabin. One ranger, a local who'd known Tom for years, whispered, "It's like he just vanished." But something about the air felt wrong, heavy, almost charged. Then, while checking under the main rug near the wood stove, they noticed the faint outline of a wooden hatch, something not listed in any of Tom's known designs. When they pried it open, a rush of stale, cold air escaped, carrying the scent of damp earth and pine resin. A narrow staircase descended into darkness. Flashlights revealed old planks, carved beams, and something else: boxes sealed with wax and wrapped in animal hide. Each was labeled with faded markings and dates spanning decades. The team hesitated, unsure if they should proceed. One officer radioed for guidance, but before he could finish his call, his flashlight flickered out. In that instant, everyone heard it: a faint echo rising from below. 3 slow knocks. When the light came back on, the hatch seemed to pulse with frost, as if something inside was breathing cold air upward. They closed it immediately and backed away, shaken. Whatever was down there, it wasn't on any official record, and no one could explain why the floorboards were warmer around the hatch than anywhere else in the cabin. The rangers sealed the property that night, leaving with more questions than answers. What was Tom hiding beneath his home? And more importantly, did he ever mean for anyone to find it? The following morning, a small team returned to Tom Oar's cabin under strict orders to document everything beneath that hatch. The storm from the night before had blanketed the entire area in silence, and the air was so cold it bit at their lungs. When they stepped inside, the cabin seemed even darker than before, as though the woods themselves were watching. The same humming was still there, faint but rhythmic, pulsing through the wooden floor like a heartbeat. With cameras rolling, they lifted the hatch again. A bitter gust swept out, carrying the smell of damp pine and burnt oil. The staircase creaked as they descended, their boots sinking slightly into the earthen floor below. What they found made every hair on their necks stand up. Dozens of leather-bound journals were stacked neatly in wooden crates, each sealed with rope and wax. The earliest dated back to 1972, years before Tom had ever appeared on Mountain Men. Each journal was marked with a symbol that looked hand-carved, a circle split by a single line down the middle. When they opened the first book, the pages were covered in tiny, meticulous handwriting, Tom's handwriting. At first, it was what they expected: stories of trapping seasons, weather notes, and hand-drawn maps of hunting trails. But as they turned the pages, the tone shifted. One entry read, "The light came again last night. The dogs hid under the bed. I heard it humming through the trees." Another mentioned voices carried by the wind, whispering in patterns that repeated for hours. Some entries were smudged, the ink blurred by what appeared to be tears or rain. Others were torn out completely. One journal even had a bullet hole clean through its center. As they examined more, they noticed the sketches, drawings of figures standing among the pines, with reflective eyes and elongated limbs. A few of the drawings were dated on the same day the local forestry department had reported unknown aerial sounds echoing across the valley. The deeper they read, the more it felt like Tom had been documenting something far beyond survival. Tucked inside the last journal was a folded piece of parchment sealed with red wax. Written across it in shaky letters were the words, "If you're reading this, it's already too late." At that moment, the generator powering their lights began to sputter. The cabin above groaned as if something heavy had shifted. One of the rangers insisted they leave immediately, while another reached for his camera. But before they could capture the scene, every light went out at once. In that pitch-black silence, one ranger swore he heard the same 3 knocks from beneath the earth again, slow, deliberate, and closer than before. When the team returned with backup, the atmosphere inside Tom Oar's cabin felt heavier, like the walls themselves had absorbed whatever was down there. They brought in forensic experts, environmental scientists, and even a historian familiar with local folklore. Each of them approached the journals carefully, wearing gloves as if the pages might crumble at a touch. The air smelled faintly of pine and metal, and the only sound was the slow, deliberate turn of paper. The first few notebooks seemed harmless. Daily routines, hand-drawn maps, detailed notes about tanning hides and setting traps. But the further they went, the more erratic the writing became. Tom's normally neat handwriting grew uneven, the ink darker and pressed deep into the pages, almost as if he had written in anger or fear. One journal described glowing lights that hovered silently over the tree line for hours at a time. Another detailed a low hum that made the ground shake and caused nearby animals to flee in panic. But the most disturbing entry was dated just 2 nights before Tom's last known sighting. "They were closer tonight," it read. "The shapes didn't move like men. The light isn't from fire. It breathes." Alongside the entry was a drawing of 3 tall figures standing behind his cabin, their faces obscured by shadows, with circles carved into their chests. Investigators who read those words felt an unease that no one wanted to admit out loud. One of them, a veteran officer, said quietly, He wasn't imagining this. He saw something. Even stranger were the stains on several pages, reddish-brown, confirmed later to be animal blood, though no one could explain why Tom would smear it across his own notes. In the final journal, there was a section sealed shut with candle wax. After carefully peeling it open, they found a small photograph tucked inside, a blurry image of the forest at night, with a faint glowing orb hovering above the trees. The timestamp indicated it was taken 3 weeks before his disappearance. Experts tried to analyze it, but the negatives were missing. The local sheriff's department ordered the materials locked away for further study. Yet, within days, unmarked vehicles arrived to transport everything out of the valley. Residents said men in dark uniforms carried sealed boxes into their trucks, refusing to answer questions. Even stranger, the hatch under Tom's floor was later filled with concrete, sealing it permanently. When asked why, officials claimed it was for safety reasons, but locals weren't buying it. They believed Tom had stumbled upon something ancient, something buried deep in the mountains that was never meant to be unearthed. And if his journals were warnings, it might already be too late to stop whatever he found. Not long after the investigation began, strange reports started flooding in from locals living near Tom Oar's property. People who had known him for decades claimed the woods around his cabin no longer felt the same. The air was thicker, heavier, and wildlife had vanished almost overnight. Deer stopped coming near the salt licks, and wolves that once roamed freely now avoided the area entirely. One neighbor, an old trapper named Bill, said he began hearing a low howling sound every night around midnight. Long, drawn out, and unlike any animal he'd ever heard before. The tone wasn't natural, almost mechanical, like metal scraping against bone. He claimed the sound always came from the direction of Tom's cabin. Another resident, a hunter who'd ventured near the property, said his flashlight flickered off, and his compass spun wildly in circles the closer he got. He swore he saw faint lights moving between the trees, pale blue, floating just above the ground. When he tried to take a photo, his phone battery drained instantly. It wasn't long before word spread through the valley that Tom's land was cursed. But some locals believed something else entirely, that Tom had been protecting them from whatever was hidden beneath that cabin. And now that he was gone, the thing he kept buried had finally been released. Park rangers began receiving calls from hikers, reporting guttural screams echoing across the valley at night. Some described hearing footsteps behind them, though no one was there. Others said they found strange symbols carved into trees, circles with a single line through the middle, identical to the marks on Tom's journals. Despite growing panic, officials downplayed the events, blaming weather patterns and wild animals. But privately, the sheriff admitted his own patrol team had refused to return to the area after hearing unexplainable noises during a nighttime sweep. To make things worse, search drones sent to map the forest crashed one after another, their signals lost near the same coordinates, Tom's cabin. Even those brave enough to visit the site in daylight spoke of feeling an intense static energy, like standing too close to a live wire. Bill, the old trapper, put it best. "That land's breathing now. It's alive. Whatever Tom found down there, it's awake." Whether it was folklore or something real, one thing was certain. The wilderness around Tom Oar's cabin had changed forever. Within days of the eerie reports, the Yaak Valley was suddenly flooded with unfamiliar vehicles. Black SUVs and unmarked trucks rolled quietly through the dirt roads, their tinted windows hiding whoever sat inside. By sunrise, federal agents had cordoned off the area surrounding Tom Oar's cabin. Locals were told the operation was for environmental safety, but no one believed that story. Witnesses claimed to see men in hazmat suits entering the cabin, while others set up radio towers and monitoring equipment deep in the forest. The air buzzed with static, and drones circled overhead, scanning every inch of the land. Residents were instructed to stay away, and any attempt to film or photograph the site was met with armed patrols and confiscated cameras. The same day, the sheriff's office received an official letter from higher authorities, ordering them to halt their investigation immediately. All documents, photos, and evidence collected from Tom's property were to be surrendered to federal custody. Even the concrete poured over the cabin's underground hatch was done under government supervision. When asked what was being protected, agents refused to comment, only stating that the area contained materials of national concern. But whispers spread fast. Some said the government had found something radioactive beneath the cabin. Others believed it was biological. A few locals even insisted that agents had recovered a large object buried deep beneath Tom's property. Something metallic, humming faintly, and carved with markings matching the ones in Tom's journals. Those who lived nearby reported power surges that fried their radios, and strange voices breaking through static whenever they tried to contact the outside world. For 2 full weeks, the entire valley was under quiet lockdown. When the agents finally left, they sealed off the cabin with steel locks and warning signs. Even the trail leading to it was erased from public maps. But the strangest part was what came afterward. Neighbors swore the mountain grew silent again. Too silent, as if whatever had been awakened was now waiting. No trace of Tom Oar was ever found, and the official report concluded only one phrase: "Case closed. Environmental anomaly." Yet those who knew Tom best refused to believe that. They knew he'd been keeping notes for a reason, and they suspected the truth about what he found had just been buried deeper than ever before. In the weeks that followed, word of Tom Oar's disappearance began to spread far beyond the borders of Montana, reaching fans and friends from his mountain men days. Those who knew him best refused to accept the official story. Eustace Conway, one of Tom's closest companions from the show, spoke in a rare interview saying, "Tom wasn't just some backwoods trapper. He understood nature better than most scientists. If something scared him enough to keep records, then it was real." Eustace described Tom as calm, deliberate, and deeply spiritual. A man who respected every inch of the land he lived on. For him to vanish without a trace and leave behind journals filled with warnings didn't make sense. Marty Maiorato echoed the same disbelief, revealing that Tom had once confided in him about something strange in the woods. Marty said Tom had grown withdrawn toward the end of filming, often staring off toward the tree line as if listening to something no one else could hear. "He told me once the forest had changed," Marty said, "that it wasn't quiet anymore. It was waiting." After the federal intervention, the production team behind Mountain Men was ordered not to discuss Tom's situation publicly, with one producer admitting off-record that they were advised to stay silent. Even Nancy, Tom's wife, had gone completely off-grid. Her family claimed she had left the valley for medical reasons months before, but others suspected she'd been forced to disappear after what Tom uncovered. A former camera operator revealed that during one of their last shoots, Tom had shown him a strange metallic object he'd found while digging a new root cellar. It was smooth, almost polished, and emitted a faint hum when touched. The footage was supposedly cut from the episode before airing, and the memory cards were later lost. Whether coincidence or cover-up, no one could say. In the absence of answers, fans flooded forums with theories. Some believed Tom had found a fragment of an ancient meteorite. Others claimed he'd stumbled onto a hidden military experiment buried deep in the mountains. A few whispered about portals, openings between worlds that the government had long known about but refused to admit existed. Whatever the truth, those closest to Tom agreed on one thing. He didn't just disappear. He walked toward something he couldn't ignore, something he'd been preparing for his whole life. And the look in his eyes during those final days wasn't fear. It was understanding. Months after Tom Oar's disappearance, the snow began to thaw, and with it came one final attempt to uncover what really happened to the legendary mountain man. A private search team, made up of former park rangers and volunteers who'd known Tom for decades, quietly entered the Yak Valley, ignoring the official "no trespassing" signs nailed to trees around his property. They brought tracking dogs, thermal drones, and metal detectors, determined to find answers where everyone else had given up. The cabin still stood silent, frost creeping through its seams, untouched since the government sealed it off. But within minutes of arriving, one of the dogs began barking furiously at the edge of the property. There, half buried in the snow, they discovered a faint trail leading away from the cabin, winding deep into the woods. The tracks were old, partially frozen over, but they matched the shape of Tom's handmade boots. With hearts pounding, they followed the trail for nearly 3 miles through twisting pines and icy ravines until they reached a river that had frozen solid. The trail stopped there, but something else caught their attention. Just a few feet from the riverbank stood a massive pine tree, its bark scarred with a carving that sent chills down every spine. The words were crude, yet unmistakable. "The wild remembers." The letters looked fresh despite the weather, and beneath them hung a small leather pouch tied with sinew, the kind Tom used for storing his fire-starting tools. Inside were several strange items: a stone knife, a strip of animal hide covered in symbols identical to those in his journals, and a tiny shard of metal that seemed to vibrate softly when held. When the sun hit it, the piece emitted a faint pulse of blue light before going still. The team's leader pocketed the shard, intending to have it analyzed, but minutes later, their satellite phones all lost signal simultaneously. Then came the sound, low, deep, and resonant, rolling across the frozen river like thunder. It wasn't wind, it wasn't an animal, it was rhythmic, like a heartbeat coming from the earth itself. The dogs refused to move, whining and clawing at the snow. The air grew colder, the light dimmed, and one of the men swore he saw a figure standing on the opposite bank, tall, motionless, watching them. When they blinked, it was gone. Panicked, the team gathered their equipment and fled the valley, leaving everything behind except the metal shard and the memory of that chilling sound. Later that night, the man who had taken the shard called the others in a panic. He said the object had begun to hum again and was glowing faintly from his desk. The call cut off suddenly, and when they went to check on him the next day, he was gone. His cabin door was wide open, a cup of coffee still steaming beside his chair, just like Tom's. The only thing left behind was the shard, lying on the table, completely cold and silent once more. Officials later retrieved it, and the case was buried under restricted evidence. Since that day, no one else has dared to venture back into Tom Oar's land, but locals claim that on quiet winter nights, if you stand near the frozen river and listen closely, you can still hear it, the slow, steady heartbeat of the wilderness, and a faint voice carried by the wind whispering, "The wild remembers." Even now, the mystery of Tom Oar's cabin remains buried beneath silence and snow. Officially, the government calls it an environmental anomaly. Unofficially, locals call it cursed ground. The land has been sealed off for good, its coordinates quietly removed from public databases. But despite every effort to erase it, whispers still spread across the valley. Late at night, truckers passing through claim to see a dim orange glow rising above the tree line, like a campfire burning where no one should be. Some say they've spotted a lone figure moving through the pines, an old man with a weathered hat walking slowly along the frozen riverbank. The few who've dared to approach describe hearing the same words echoing through the wind: "Keep the fire alive." The phrase from Tom's cabin wall. Could he still be out there, surviving deep in the wilderness, guarding something he never meant for the world to find? Or did he become one with the land he loved so fiercely, another spirit bound to the Montana wilds? What's certain is that the discovery inside his cabin changed everything. Those journals, those carvings, and that strange metallic shard all point to a truth too big to fit inside any government report. Whether it was a relic from the Earth's ancient past, a remnant of something unexplainable, or a warning of what's still hidden beneath the mountains, Tom Oar's story stands as a chilling reminder. The wild keeps its secrets, and it remembers those who try to uncover them. If you found this story as haunting as we did, make sure to like, subscribe, and share, because the truth about what lies beneath those mountains might still be waiting to surface.